In school, the two most popular girls actively pursued me. Not only was I not happy at all, but I even kept my distance from them. My classmates were jealous of me, and some even scolded me for not knowing how lucky I was. On campus, many handsome boys hate me. How an ordinary boy like me could attract the favor of two school beauties at the same time. However, no one knew that the pursuit of the school belle was not out of sincerity, but a carefully planned conspiracy. In reality, I was just a pawn in their game. I didn't expect that they underestimated me when they thought they could easily manipulate me. I slapped them in the face. The school beauty looked at me in disbelief. Jacob, how could you do this to us? Because I was reborn. In this life, I will never be their plaything. Chapter 1. I was reborn and stood in front of the mirror. I saw my young and flawless face and my still fair fingertips, and I was shocked. After a moment, I picked up my phone to check the time. June 26th, 2024. This was the day of my college entrance examination, a critical moment in choosing a major, and my two female friends, Eve and Kelly, actually confessed their love to me. I was shocked and rushed into the office without thinking much. I found Teacher Annie and said directly, "Teacher, I want to change my major. I want to transfer from South City University to North City University." After hearing this, Teacher, Annie smiled and said happily, "Have you finally realized it? You are the top scorer in the city's college entrance examination. South City University is good, but North City University is the best university. It would be a pity not to go there." I replied with a wry smile. I was too willful before and caused trouble for the teacher. Now I have decided to change back. My change did not take too much time, and the application was completed quickly. However, when I got home, there were already several unexpected guests waiting at the door. They were my two female friends, Eve and Kelly, and my good friend Anthony. I asked, "Why are you all here?" Eve's usually cold expression became warm at this moment. She smiled at me and said, "Did you forget? We agreed to have dinner at your house today to celebrate that the four of us were admitted to the same university." Kelly, always willful, walked up to me, stood beside me, and patted my head. "Big idiot. If I knew you were busy preparing your speech for outstanding graduates, I would have arranged it long ago and just come to eat." Just as I was about to speak, my cell phone rang. It was Teacher in calling. "Jacob," she said with a hint of regret, "you left in such a hurry just now that I forgot to tell you something. You were originally planning to give a speech and be selected as an outstanding student in 3 days, but suddenly, two board members spoke at the same time and decided to give this opportunity to Anthony." I was a little stunned. Why was this happening? Did Anthony have some kind of relationship with the two board members that would allow them to personally intervene and change the decision? However, when I looked at Eve and Kelly, I knew it in my heart. Wasn't the father of these two girls my childhood friend and a member of the school board? My heart tightened, and I couldn't help but have the answer in my mind. I calmly said to Teacher Annie, "I understand." "Thank you, Teacher," and obviously didn't expect me to be so calm. There was a hint of surprise in her tone. "You are a top student. No matter what, you will give a better speech on the stage. This is also an honor. Are you sure you want to give the opportunity to Anthony?" I smiled slightly, and I'd already made up my mind. That's it. Not only that, this time, I even decided to give Eve and Kelly to Anthony. After all, I didn't want to experience the pain of my past life again. In my past life, Eve and Kelly also loved me so deeply and were eager to show me their hearts. I chose Eve the first time, but in the 3rd year of our marriage, Eve died in a car accident to protect Anthony. At that moment, I finally understood that she had never really loved me. Her heart always belonged to Anthony. I suffered a double blow and fell into despair. At this moment, Kelly appeared in front of me. She silently accompanied me through the pain and reminded me that she still existed in my life. She was my hope for rebirth and gave me the courage to start over. I chose to marry Kelly for the 2nd time. In our marriage, she is still as gentle to me as before, but her gentleness is not just love, it is more of mutual respect. At first, I thought this tenderness turned into family affection, but it was not until the elderly Anthony was diagnosed with heart disease that I truly realized the depth of Kelly's affection. She donated her heart without hesitation to save Anthony's life. At that moment, I finally understood Kelly's heart. The person she loved was still Anthony. I didn't understand why they both loved Anthony, but chose me. Why did they do that? Until the funeral, when Anthony kindly revealed the truth. He said, "Do you know why they want to marry you?" "Of course, because I planned all this." I was stunned, and my heart almost stopped beating. Anthony continued, "If they don't listen to me and don't marry you, I will disappear from their world forever." They are afraid of me, so they are eager to confess to you. He paused, with a hint of contempt in his tone. Do you know why you have no sons or daughters in your life? Because they volunteered to be contraceptives for me. Even if they marry you, their hearts will always belong to me. I felt like I was struck by lightning, and my heart went blank. I frantically asked Anthony why he did this. His answer was still ridiculous. You were born with everything and lived a comfortable life, while I had to work hard. I couldn't accept everything you got easily. I just want to see you suffer, and I want to tell you that your so-called happiness is actually just an illusion I gave you. After saying this, Anthony left triumphantly, but I was so angry that I vomited blood and eventually died of anger. Fate has given me a chance to be reborn, and this time, I will never have anything to do with him again. Chapter 2. Anthony called me, and after listening, he came closer to me curiously. What's the matter? I looked at him calmly, as if we were discussing something completely insignificant. 3 days later, you will be the speaker. Anthony was obviously surprised and asked immediately, What's going on? I'm not doing well, and I'm not as capable as you. Why did you suddenly change me? He seemed a little overwhelmed. I have to get ready quickly. He looked very surprised and ran out before he finished speaking. Eve and Kelly did not try to stop him, but their eyes followed him all the time. It was obvious that they were full of love for him and seemed to hope to leave with him at this moment. I looked into their eyes quietly and said calmly, If you want to leave, go ahead. Eve looked at me and frowned. What are you talking about? You're still here. Why are you chasing him? After I said this, Luaire suddenly came back to her senses. A hint of confusion flashed in her eyes, but then she couldn't help laughing. She paused and tried to comfort me. This is just an opportunity to give a speech. There's no need to take it too seriously. Kelly also said, Indeed, Jacob is so impressive that the school can't find anyone to replace you. There was a hint of certainty in her tone, as if she was endorsing Eve's words. I pursed my lips tightly and remained silent. In my previous life, they had comforted me so softly, but who could have imagined that behind their tenderness was a plan to replace me? I was about to say something, but before I could say anything, Eve and Kelly interrupted me again. They looked mysterious and said, Jacob, we are taking you somewhere. Without further ado, they dragged me out of the house and brought me to the destination. The scene before my eyes stunned me instantly. Flowers were blooming all over the sky, colorful balloons were swaying in the wind, and the whole place was shrouded in a romantic atmosphere. It was then that I suddenly realized that this was a carefully arranged confession venue. Eve took out a bunch of white roses from the corner, her face full of affection, her eyes looking straight at me, and said, Jacob, you should know how I feel about you during this period. Now, I just want an answer. Before I could react, Kelly took out a bunch of bright red roses from behind her and said in a gentle but firm voice, Jacob, I like you first. I have been preparing for today's confession for 3 whole months. You must choose me. As long as you agree to be with me, I will love you forever and I will do anything you ask me to do. I stood there completely stunned. Looking at their intimate appearance, I suddenly had a feeling in my heart. If it weren't for this expression, I might have really believed in their love. We were the closest childhood playmates, but how come I never realized that they had such superb acting skills? Just as I was about to respond, several phones vibrated at the same time. It turned out to be Anthony, who had left early. At this moment, he sent a message to the 4 of us in the group. I just blew up a light bulb while fixing it. Everyone, please be careful when fixing light bulbs next time. I just bandaged the wound. A photo with a pitiful expression was attached. Eve and Kelly's faces changed instantly. Eve didn't care about the ongoing confession at all. She stood up and said, Someone in the family is injured. I have to go and help bandage it. Kelly also stood up and agreed, I'll go with you too. After that, he looked back at me and added awkwardly, Jacob, it's getting dark. We can't delay any longer. As for your choice. Who? How about we talk about it tomorrow? After saying that, they left in a hurry without caring about my reaction. I looked at their backs as they left, and I couldn't help but feel a little funny. It was obvious that Eve and Kelly didn't love me at all, but in the past days, I had never realized this and always turned a blind eye to it. I lowered my head, and my eyes fell on the 2 bouquets of flowers and the gift box they left behind. The corners of my mouth slightly raised, pulling out a smile, but there was no joy in my heart. Without hesitation, I picked up the bouquet and the gift and threw them directly into the trash can. I whispered, Eve, Kelly, I will not choose any of you in this life. In the next 2 months, I intentionally reduced my interactions with them and even blocked all contact with him. After that, I went on a trip alone with Anthony for a month. When I came back from the trip, I saw two people standing in front of the door. They were Eve and Kelly. As soon as they heard the sound of my suitcase, they immediately came to greet me. One of them hugged one of my arms and asked with a worried look on her face, "Where have you been for this month? You didn't answer the phone or reply to messages. Did you know we have been looking for you?" Looking at the worry in their eyes, it seemed so sincere that I didn't even know how long it had been since they had had a good rest and taken good care of themselves. The two people in front of me were in a state of disarray. Their eyes were bloodshot, and they looked haggard. It was really hard to imagine that they were once the celebrities in the largest class in the affiliated school. I looked at them quietly, and my thoughts uncontrollably drifted back to when I was 13 years old. At that time, my parents had exhausted all their patience due to the endless quarrels and finally chose to separate. However, when it came to my custody, their already cold attitude towards me was even more chilling. They passed the buck to each other, and neither wanted to accept me as a so-called burden. In the end, they only left me a house and a bank card, saying that it was enough to support me until I became an adult, and then they just disappeared from my life as if they had evaporated from the face of the earth. The night my parents left, I seemed calm on the surface, neither crying nor questioning. But when the night was quiet, the grievance and loneliness in my heart were like a surging tide, drowning me. So I ran out quietly by myself. At that time, Eve and Kelly found that I was missing, and they were as anxious as ants on a hot pot. They searched everywhere all night. Finally, they found me by the lake, feeling lost and horrified. Their faces were filled with anxiety, and their voices trembled slightly because of worry. "Uncle and Aunt are gone, but we are still here. They don't want you, but we want you, and we will always be with you. Don't sneak away by yourself again, otherwise we will really worry to death." I once naively thought that this friendship would be the most solid support in my life. But who could have imagined that things in the world would be so unpredictable? In the third chapter, the story took a turn, and a hint of melancholy flashed in their eyes. We were once so close, but they were the ones who hurt me the most in my previous life. Until now, I still can't figure out why they fell in love with Anthony. But things have already happened, and the past cannot be changed. There is no point in dwelling on the reasons behind it. I gently pushed them away and said calmly that I was going on a graduation trip. He frowned and asked worriedly, "Why are you going alone?" Kelly also looked at me disapprovingly. "Aren't you afraid of getting lost? Didn't we agree that 4 of us would go together?" I reminded her expressionlessly. "We said 3 of us would go." Luer seemed to suddenly realize something, and after a pause she asked, "If you don't like him, then let's keep our distance from him in the future, okay? I was just thinking that since the 4 of us are in the same school, I should take better care of him. Since you don't like him, we should just interact less with him. In my heart, you are always the most important." If it weren't for those painful pasts, and if I hadn't returned with the memories, I might have been moved to tears when I heard these words. But now I just calmly walked around them and headed towards the room, leaving only one sentence. "I have to go back to put my luggage. I have to go." Eve and Kelly hurriedly followed me. He went on to say that the class was organizing a class reunion today, and the location was a barbecue at the beach. "Let's go together. The North City University I'm going to is far away from here, and it may be difficult for us to meet again in the future. I think this is a good opportunity to say goodbye to my friends for the last time." I thought about it for a while and finally agreed. There were a lot of people at the party. Almost all my classmates were there. Anthony was among them. It seemed that my sudden decision to travel alone had frightened Eve and Kelly enough that they did keep their distance from Anthony. The world is so absurd. I went to the toilet nearby, and the scene I saw when I came out was like a basin of cold water poured over my head, making me feel like I was falling into an ice cellar. Eve, who has always been called a goddess, and the rich girl Kelly, both lowered their heads at this time, holding Anthony's hands tightly. They looked like 2 docile puppies, leaning against their owner pitifully, afraid of being abandoned. All they could hear was them crying, "Please don't let us chase Jacob anymore, okay? Pretending to be with him. Every moment is like torture. You're the one we really like. Why can't we stay with you?" Anthony was tightly surrounded by Eve and Kelly, with an imperceptible flash of pride and satisfaction in his eyes, as if he was enjoying the attention he received. Faced with their affectionate confessions, he showed no sign of softening his heart. His tone was calm, but revealed an unquestionable determination. "There's no other way. I've said before, if you don't marry Jacob, I will disappear from your world forever." As soon as these words came out, Eve and Kelly were immediately panicked. The two panicked and spoke in an anxious tone and quickly changed the topic. No matter what happens, we will definitely be with him, and we will definitely do it. How do we perform today? If it's good, can you give us a reward? Anthony raised the corner of his mouth slightly, smiled, and gently stretched out his hand. The two of them seemed to have been summoned, and they couldn't wait to throw themselves into his arms, as if they were holding the most precious and rare treasure in the world. I really couldn't bear to watch this disgusting scene. I was filled with anger and disappointment. I turned around and walked back to the party from the other direction. Not long after, Eve and Kelly came back one after another. When they saw me, they acted as if nothing had happened and were a little too enthusiastic. When I was thirsty, they immediately handed me drinks. When I was hungry, food was immediately delivered to my hand. When I felt a little cold, they put on their coats. They were so attentive that it was as if I was worshipped as a king. A classmate nearby saw this scene and couldn't help but gossip out of curiosity. One is cold and beautiful, and the other is arrogant. There are so many people chasing you in school. Jacob, who are you going to choose? As soon as these words came out, Eve and Kelly surrounded me instantly, with expectation in their eyes, and asked, "You didn't give an answer that day. Do you have one now?" Anthony, who was originally one step behind, heard this, and a hint of mockery flashed in his eyes, as if he was watching an interesting farce. The scene outside the toilet just now clearly appeared in my mind, and my heart was stabbed. My eyes flickered, and I didn't answer them directly, but just said calmly, "I will tell you the answer on the first day of school." Suddenly, Anthony's suggestive voice came from behind me. "Let's look forward to that day." Then, he said to me excitedly, "Jacob, the shells here are very beautiful. Let's pick some up and bring them back." I was filled with anxiety and frowned unconsciously. I was about to reject him, but suddenly I felt him grab my shoulders tightly and forcibly pull me up. We did not stop, but continued to walk forward, getting farther and farther away. When I realized it, we were already quite far from the meeting place. I pushed him away and asked with a frown, "Aren't I going to pick up shells? Why are we walking so far?" He smiled innocently and pointed around. "Look, there are a lot of shells here." Anthony walked. He approached me with pretended curiosity. "Jacob, you just said that you would make a decision after school starts. Why do you have to wait until then? Can you tell me in advance?" He seemed not to hear my refusal and continued to talk to himself. "Are you still undecided? Do you want me to help you see who cares about you more?" Hearing this, a feeling of uneasiness surged in my heart. Just as I frowned and was about to refuse, suddenly, I felt a sharp pain on my head. I turned my head subconsciously and found Anthony holding a big stone in his hand with a smug smile on his face. Then, everything went black before my eyes. I lost consciousness and was completely immersed in darkness. When I opened my eyes again, the smell of seawater instantly sobered me up. I was horrified to find that Anthony and I were struggling desperately in the seawater. "Help, I can't swim." Instinctively, I began to struggle desperately, but the more I struggled, the more sea water poured into my mouth, and my cry for help became weaker and weaker. In my blurred vision, I saw two familiar figures who jumped into the water without hesitation. It was Eve and Kelly. However, to my despair, they swam towards Anthony. Soon, I had no strength to struggle anymore. I felt myself slowly sinking, my body gradually losing strength in the deep sea, and darkness swallowed me. When I woke up again, I found myself lying in a hospital bed. Eve and Kelly were by my side. When they saw me open my eyes, their expressions were full of mixed emotions, and they immediately started to apologize. They said, "Jacob, we're so sorry. It was so dark, and we mistook you for him. We really didn't mean anything else. Please don't be angry, okay?" But I knew that these words were full of loopholes. Anthony and I were completely different in appearance and temperament. The reason why they saved Anthony was obvious. They loved him more. My heart was filled with bitterness, but I could only force a smile and turn my head away, silently, so as not to let them see the disappointment and sadness in my eyes. At this time, the nurse walked into the ward and asked, "The boy next door has woken up too. Do you want to go see him?" Eve and Kelly's expressions immediately became anxious. They were silent for a while, and finally said, "He is lying alone, without his family. We will go and see him and come back." After they finished talking, they hurriedly left the ward. At this moment, my cell phone suddenly rang. Anthony sent a message. "Jacob, I wanted to see who cared about you more, but I didn't expect them to save me. I'm sorry. Maybe they just thought I was lonely and helpless. Don't blame them." When I saw this message, I felt nothing in my heart, like a pool of stagnant water without a single ripple. I turned off my phone silently, without responding to his hypocrisy and affectation. In the days that followed, Eve and Kelly kept coming in and out of my ward. Every time the nurse came to change my dressing or check on me, they would act intimate and pretend that we had a good relationship. But I know the truth is that their hearts are no longer with me. Every minute and every second spent with them is torture for me. I really didn't want to face their hypocrisy anymore, so I said calmly, "If you have nothing else to do, you can go and do your own thing." As soon as these words came out, their expressions froze, and a trace of guilt flashed in their eyes, but they quickly regained their composure. They obviously understood that the most important thing for them at the moment was to get as close to me as possible, and finally they said calmly, "You are injured, and you're the most important now. We are not in a hurry for anything. By the way, Jacob, are you hungry? It's almost time for dinner. I'll go buy you something." Looking at these two people, on the surface they're still with me, but in fact their hearts have already flown far away. I didn't say much, but just told myself silently in my heart, "It doesn't matter, just wait until school starts. By then, the three of them will go to Nanjing University, and I will go to Beijing University, one in the south and one in the north, and we will never have any intersection again." A few days later, Anthony and I were almost fully recovered from our injuries and met the criteria for discharge. On the day of discharge, the four of us received a call and learned that our acceptance letters had arrived. Anthony smiled and said, "Then I'm going home first. School will start soon. Please take care of me in the future." He smiled and waved goodbye to Eve and Kelly, who also responded with smiles on their faces. "Yeah, see you then." Eve and Kelly watched Anthony leave, their eyes full of love, which made me feel disgusted, so I turned away first. Only then did they come to their senses and hurriedly chased after me. When we got home, there were 3 packages on the door. Eve and Kelly didn't care and opened their packages directly. When they looked up at me, they found me calmly holding the packages and preparing to leave. They exchanged a puzzled look and asked, "Jacob, why don't you open it? Is it stuck? Do you want us to help you?" Then they naturally took the package from me and opened it. However, when they saw what was inside, the smiles on their faces froze instantly, and they were so shocked that they couldn't speak. Eve asked in disbelief, "Jacob, why is your acceptance letter different from ours?" My expression remained calm, and I replied calmly, "Maybe it's because the colleges are different." After that, I quickly snatched the admission letter from their hands, tried to keep a calm expression, and explained casually, "I'm a little tired, so I'll go back first." Eve and Kelly frowned, feeling that something was wrong. Just as they were about to ask again, I had already walked out the door quickly, isolating their voices and eyes behind me. They exchanged glances, and a sense of irritation inexplicably surged in their hearts. Recently, I have given them a different feeling, as if something is out of their control, but they couldn't explain it clearly, nor could they grasp the strange feeling. Eve said anxiously, "Do you want to explain it to him?" She subconsciously sensed that I was angry and wanted Kelly to go and find out. But Kelly looked impatient, combing his hair casually, and said angrily, "I'm too lazy to go." I was tired of their hypocrisy and said lightly, "If you have nothing to do, you can go and do your own thing." After saying this, Eve and Kelly looked a little guilty, but they quickly regained their composure. They seemed to understand that the most important thing right now was to get as close to me as possible. Finally, they forced themselves to remain calm and said, "You're injured. Nothing else matters now. Let's take care of you first. Jacob, are you hungry? It's almost time for dinner. I'll go get you something to eat." Seeing that the two of them seemed to still care about me on the surface, but their minds had actually flown away, I didn't say much, but just told myself silently, "It's okay. Just wait until school starts." By then, the 3 of them would go to Nanjing University, and I would go to Beijing University, one in the south and one in the north, and we would no longer have any intersection from then on. A few days later, Anthony and I were almost healed from our injuries. On the day we were discharged from the hospital, the 4 of us received calls informing us that our acceptance letters had arrived. Anthony smiled and said, "I'm going home now. School will start soon. Please take care of me in the future." He smiled and said goodbye to Eve and Kelly. The 2 smiled and responded, "Yeah, see you then." Eve and Kelly watched Anthony leave, their eyes full of love. Seeing their appearance, I felt disgusted and turned away first. They finally came to their senses and hurried to catch up with me. When they got home, there were 3 packages at the door. Eve and Kelly didn't care and quickly opened their packages. When they looked up at me, they saw me calmly holding the package and preparing to leave. They looked at each other with confusion in their eyes and asked, Jacob, why don't you open it? Is it stuck? Do you want us to help you? They naturally took the package from me and opened it. However, when they saw what was inside, the smiles on their faces froze instantly, and they stood there in a daze. Eve asked in disbelief, Jacob, why is your acceptance letter different from ours? I calmly replied, maybe it's because we are from different colleges. After that, I quickly snatched the admission letter from their hands, tried to keep a calm expression, and casually explained, I'm a little tired, so I'll go back first. Eve and Kelly frowned, clearly feeling something was wrong. Just as they were about to ask again, I'd already walked out the door quickly, completely isolating myself from their voices and sights. They exchanged glances, and an inexplicable feeling of irritation welled up in their hearts. Recently, my changes made them feel as if something was out of their control, but they couldn't figure out the wrong feeling. Eve said anxiously, should we talk to him about this? She subconsciously sensed that I was angry and wanted Kelly to go and find out what was going on. But Kelly looked impatient, tidying up his hair, and said angrily, I'm too lazy to go. Just as I was about to call a taxi home, a hand suddenly reached out from behind and tightly covered my mouth. Ignoring my struggle, several people dragged me into the bathroom and locked the door. It was only then that I saw clearly that one of the people who dragged me into the bathroom was the bad girl who was slapped by Eve and Kelly just now. At this point, I could no longer escape and could only face the situation. I panicked and shouted for help. Someone help me. However, the surrounding bar was unusually quiet at this time. There was no sound anywhere, and my shouts echoed in the empty space, but there was no response. The thug in front of her had a blank expression, even a bit of complacency. She sneered and said, You can yell. I put up a maintenance sign outside. No one will come to help. I'm really lucky today. I met a student who is willing to beat you up for a few red envelopes. It's worth breaking a few bones. This made me realize instantly that these thugs were hired by Anthony. The previous threat was just a cover. His real purpose was obviously to divert Eve and Kelly. What he really wanted was my destruction. Seeing the thugs approaching aggressively, I kicked one away with all my strength and rushed into the toilet cubicle next to me to continue calling for help. It might take some time for the police to arrive, and in the current situation, it was obviously too late to call for help. Fortunately, Eve and Kelly were not far away. As long as they could come back, they would definitely be able to save me. I quickly called Eve, but no one answered the call, and it was hung up. I called Kelly again once, twice, 3 times. I made more than a dozen calls in a row, but the calls were automatically hung up because the cubicle door was pried open by the thugs. As the thug approached with a sinister smile, despair instantly overwhelmed me. As he rushed into the cubicle, I rushed forward desperately looking for any weapon to fight back. Finally, my eyes fixed on the aromatherapy candle holder next to the sink. Covered in blood, I suddenly raised the candle holder and smashed it at the thug, then stumbled out of the bathroom. I walked out of the bar in a panic and saw Eve, Kelly, and Anthony were still there. Anthony said hypocritically, Jacob, I called so many times, why didn't you answer? There was a strange light in his eyes, seemingly caring, but actually hiding contempt. Eve frowned and said coldly, What does he want to do? You are the most important thing now. Promise me that you will never come to this kind of place again. Kelly even turned off his phone and said coldly, It has nothing to do with me whether he lives or dies. I only care about you. You are the most important. Quit this part-time job as soon as possible. Anthony was surrounded by 2 people. He pretended to be humble and hid his pride. He said, Okay, I'll just try for one day. If you don't like it, then I'll quit. I just don't want to spend your money. Eve smiled and said gently, Everything I have, my heart and my life, belongs to you. Why would I care about this little money? Kelly also said softly, From now on, don't say such things again. Facing Anthony, Kelly's tone and expression became unconsciously gentle, and the atmosphere between the 3 of them was so harmonious that people almost forgot about the others. That's Eve and Kelly, my childhood friends who once promised to be with me forever, but now they are for others and no longer care about my life or death. I smiled bitterly, said nothing more, and turned to leave. Unexpectedly, this action attracted the attention of several people over there. When they saw me covered in blood and disheveled clothes, they were shocked and ran over to ask, Jacob, what's wrong with you? What happened? I was about to speak, but Anthony said, I may have drunk too much and I feel dizzy. Who can take me to the hospital? When his pretended weak voice sounded, Eve and Kelly's faces immediately turned gloomy. They surrounded me and competed to say, I'll take you there. They refused to give in to each other, secretly competing with each other while helping Anthony leave. In a blink of an eye, I was left alone again. I got up early, washed up, and went to the police station with the audio I recorded in the bathroom to report the case. The police immediately summoned Anthony. But a few minutes later, the people who came to greet me were not Anthony, but Eve and Kelly. They did not ask or care about my situation at all. And when they arrived in front of the police, they said it was a misunderstanding. Then several bodyguards appeared and dragged me away by force. I just felt a deep sense of powerlessness. How come this police station has become my own backyard? It's ridiculous and helpless. As soon as we left the police station, Eve and Kelly turned to me with gloomy faces. Eve's tone was full of anger and confusion, and she asked, "Jacob, why did you frame us?" I had expected such a reaction from them, and I didn't even bother to explain. I just calmly took out my phone and played the audio again. "I'm so lucky today. I met a student who paid to help me deal with you." The clear voice of the thug reached their ears directly. Eve and Kelly were both stunned, with surprise written all over their faces. But after a moment, they still looked at me with determination in their eyes and said, "He is so pure and kind. How could he do such a thing? Do you still want to forge the recording to frame him?" Hearing their unconditional trust, I felt a strong desire for revenge. However, I thought to myself that such people were not worth my sacrifice. I said calmly, "Okay, this police station is over. I'm going to the next one." I didn't want to waste any more time with them, so I broke free from the bodyguards and resolutely turned around and left. They didn't pursue me any further. Eve said coldly, "We have already made arrangements. No one in the entire South City will take your case." I turned around in disbelief and looked at their cold faces. It was as if a bolt of lightning had struck me, and I almost couldn't stand. Is the sky in South City really that dark? After all, we grew up together. Seeing my collapse, Kelly softened his tone and advised, "Jacob, stop messing around. First of all, this is not the right thing to do. Even if we are classmates, school is about to start, and there is no need to ruin other people's future." At this moment, I was really defeated by their logic. Even though I was almost destroyed, they still said that I shouldn't ruin other people's future. I was angry and in pain, and my heart was full of self-mockery. Yes, he is kind, and I am malicious. I was almost ruined by others. How can I compare to his mercy? I almost reported the murderer with great difficulty, but my reputation and future were ruined. From childhood to now, this is the first time Eve and Kelly have seen me so angry and desperate. When they thought of me covered in blood yesterday, their hearts couldn't help but tighten. They were about to speak, but I didn't want to listen anymore, so I turned around and left. The moment I turned around, I clenched my teeth so tightly that I almost bled. I thought to myself, it doesn't matter, it will be over soon, and soon our lives will no longer have any intersection. I don't know if it was because the last phone call that day made me shaken, or Anthony still didn't give up trying to get them to win me back. In the following days, Eve and Kelly sent various gifts every day to try to apologize to me. I always kept the door closed and was busy putting this old house up for sale. I had decided to settle down in City A and never wanted to return to this place full of memories. The house was in an excellent location, and after only 5 days on the market, a real estate agent knocked on my door. He said, "Mr. Wong, I have a client who really likes your house and is willing to pay a high price for it. However, the client is buying it for a deceased relative. They think the layout of the house has good feng shui and want to burn it for use in the afterlife. I'm not sure if you mind." I shook my head without hesitation. "I don't mind. Anyway, I don't plan to come back in the future. Whether it's burned or used for something else, it has nothing to do with me." The details of the deal were quickly worked out. The money arrived quickly, and the clients began preparations to burn down the house. I personally escorted the agent out, and when I came back, I happened to meet Eve, Kelly, and Anthony. Eve frowned unconsciously, turned her eyes to the man who had just left, and asked, "Who is he?" "I have told you many times not to let salespeople in. It's not safe for you to be alone when we're not here." Kelly also frowned, with displeasure in his voice. At this time, Anthony hurried to smooth things over. "Hey, don't be so nervous. I believe Jacob knows what he is doing." Noticing their concern for me, Anthony pretended to understand and casually showed off the design in his hand, saying, "Jacob, look, my design just won an international award, and the organizer notified me to go and receive the award." I had no interest in listening to his bragging, but I took a quick glance. Just as I was about to turn around and leave, my eyes were attracted by the design draft. I snatched the design and took a closer look. I found that it was exactly the same as my previous draft. To be precise, it was my original draft. I asked angrily, "How did you get my original draft? Do you know that this is stealing?" Anger rushed to my heart and my chest almost burned. However, as soon as I finished speaking, I was interrupted by Eve. She frowned and said firmly, "This is my own original work. How could it be your draft?" Anthony also took the opportunity to interrupt. "Jacob, what are you talking about? This is my hard-earned work. How could I steal it from you? I know you have a problem with me, but you can't just take away my glory." I was too lazy to argue with Anthony. After all, who would easily admit to stealing? I held the design tightly, but my eyes turned to Kelly. I had only shown this design to her. Sure enough, when our eyes met, she quickly looked away, not daring to look at me again. I felt a deep sense of helplessness rising from the bottom of my heart. When I turned back to look at Anthony, my attention was drawn to the amulet around his neck. I suddenly asked, "Did you give it what I gave you?" My voice was heavy and full of doubt. The amulet was obtained when Eve was in a coma due to a car accident a few years ago. I was so anxious that I didn't know what to do. I heard that the amulets at Guhua Temple were very effective, so I went to Guhua Temple to count out 3 times and 9 times to get it. Now, she actually gave the amulet to Anthony. Lu unconsciously avoided my gaze, too nervous to look me in the face. At this moment, Anthony even added fuel to the fire, bragging shamelessly, "I like Eve, so she gave me the amulet. Is it really that important?" As soon as these words came out, Eve and Kelly instinctively blocked Anthony behind them, fearing that I would do something impulsive in a fit of anger. I just slowly closed my eyes and took a deep breath. When I opened my eyes again, there was only calmness in my eyes. I looked at Kelly first and said, "From now on, I will no longer share my design drafts with you." Then, I turned to Eve and said, "From now on, I will no longer pray for your safety." After saying that, I quickly turned around and closed the door. I really didn't want to have anything to do with them anymore. Eve and Kelly since then. Their apology messages came every day, but I knew in my heart that their apologies were not because they truly recognized their mistakes, but because they were afraid that if they didn't please me, they would lose Anthony. This continued until the day before school started. I finally went to our former secret base for the last time. After my parents divorced, Eve and Kelly knew that I liked orchids, so they bought a piece of land in my name and planted all kinds of precious orchids. Whenever I feel sad, I come here, and they always find me here. Tomorrow, I will go to City A. This will probably be my last time here. However, when I arrived at the secret base, I was shocked by the scene in front of me. The orchids were in a mess, with petals scattered all over the ground. It turned out that Anthony had destroyed them wantonly in order to take pictures, and the orchids that Eve and Kelly had carefully planted for me were now suffering from his harmful hands. Until they heard the sound and saw me standing at the door, the two panicked and hurried over to explain. "Jacob, let's explain, we just saw that he likes to take pictures here, so But I didn't see any guilt in their eyes. I should have been angry and sad, but at this moment, I was unusually calm. I said, "It's okay, you guys continue filming." Then I turned and left. Jacob, wait." 2 voices sounded from behind me at the same time, but I didn't even turn around. I didn't stop until someone grabbed my hands on the left and right, and then I looked at them. Eve said, "We will go together when school starts tomorrow. You said you would give us the answer tomorrow." Eve held my hand tightly, but I suddenly felt uneasy. Kelly seemed to be competing with Eve and quickly said, "Don't go with her. Come with me. I am waiting for your answer too." The 2 of them were competing secretly, but I exerted a little force and easily shook them off. I smiled and said, "Don't worry, I've made my choice." After that, I turned and walked away, leaving Eve and Kelly standing there. The uneasy feeling grew stronger and stronger, as if something was disappearing from them uncontrollably. The next day, I packed my bag and was about to block Eve, Kelly, and Anthony when I suddenly received 2 messages. Eve sent, "Jacob, I'm sorry. I have something urgent to do today and can't go with you." Kelly sent, "Jacob, I can't go with you today. I have something urgent to do." After seeing these 2 messages, I instinctively opened Anthony's circle of friends. Sure enough, he just updated a status which said, "The university is great and many seniors are willing to take me on a tour." I chuckled. Eve and Kelly's so-called urgent matters were just their fear that Anthony would be taken away by someone else. I didn't expose them, but blocked their contact information one by one. As I dragged my suitcase out of the house, I took one last look at the house I had lived in for 18 years, and then I started the fire myself. The old house gradually disappeared in the sea of fire, and I turned around with my luggage and never looked back. At the new student registration area of NTU, Eve and Kelly became the focus of everyone's attention as soon as they arrived. They naturally got along well with Anthony, and everyone envied their friendship. Anthony waved goodbye to them with a smile on his face and reminded them, "Didn't Jacob say he would make a decision today? You should go pick him up to avoid delay." Kelly rolled his eyes impatiently. "He said he had made up his mind and would tell us today, right?" Eve was calmer. She knew Jacob was always decisive, so she responded gently, "Jacob will definitely not regret it." Seeing Anthony off, Eve did not reject his words immediately. Instead, she thought about it and said softly, "Let's pick him up later. He shouldn't mind." The two returned to the freshman registration area and stood there, attracting almost everyone's attention. Strangers kept coming up to them and asking for their contact information. They were busy dealing with those enthusiastic people seeking relationships and finally got rid of the waves of interruptions. However, Jacob did not show up. Eve could not help but mutter to herself, "Where is Jacob? The freshman orientation is almost over." The sky gradually darkened. Eve frowned and took out her cell phone to call Jacob when Kelly suddenly raised his voice. "Eve, something happened." Eve was startled by her tone and turned to glare at her. "What are you making such a fuss about?" Kelly whispered, "Jacob's house burned down. No wonder he didn't come today. I'll call him right away to see where he is." After she finished speaking, she hurriedly dialed the phone, only to find that her number was blocked. She widened her eyes, unable to believe it, and quickly found Jacob as contact information again and tried to send a message again. "Why block me?" But when she clicked send, a bright red exclamation mark appeared on the screen. No matter how she tried to contact Jacob, all channels were blocked. Kelly held the phone, looked at Eve angrily, shook his head, and said, "He blocked all my contact information. You could try it too." Eve was stunned for a moment, and suddenly remembered that Jacob had mentioned making a choice today. Her expression eased a little, and with a hint of luck, she called Jacob, "We are friends. Even if you decide to choose me, you won't block me." There was a hint of anticipation in her relaxed tone, but a cold, robotic female voice came from the other end of the phone, which immediately made her heart sink. The two tried all possible ways to contact Jacob, but finally confirmed that they were all blocked by Jacob. Eve couldn't help but feel annoyed. Just because I didn't send him to school, is it necessary to be so petty? And blocked me? It's too much. Eve always thought that I did it on purpose because I was angry and secretly felt that she was too childish. Kelly saw that the atmosphere was a bit heavy and said softly, "Forget it. I was not very nice to Jacob before. I will find a chance to talk to him when he arrives at school." She was originally in a bad mood, but after finding out that Eve was also blocked by me, she relaxed a little and began to take the initiative to say some comforting words. Thinking back on the past few days, Eve felt that her previous frustration seemed to be beginning to dissipate, but her brows were still not completely relaxed. Although the blocked emotions were temporarily put aside, they still felt a little unhappy. It was not until Anthony called and asked what choice Jacob finally made that they suddenly remembered what had happened. "Jacob's house is on fire, but he has blocked us all. Can you try calling him and ask?" they told Anthony tentatively. On the other end of the phone, Anthony quickly sent a helpless expression. "Jacob also blocked me. I can't find him." This news undoubtedly made them even angrier. Eve held the phone and said angrily, "Can you believe it? He even blocked us. Although we didn't pursue his previous actions these days, he's gone even further now." Kelly was equally angry. "When he comes tomorrow, he must apologize to us." The next day, in order not to lose any clues, Eve and Kelly arrived at school earlier than the orientation teacher. But as time went by, the time for reporting was approaching, and Jacob still did not show up. The two began to worry. Was it because of the Wong family's house that he could not make it? Just as Eve was hesitating whether she should go to the Wong family's house, the last freshman walked into the registration office with his admission letter. Seeing the admission letter that was exactly the same as hers, she suddenly remembered the day when she mailed the letter. At that time, she and Kelly went to find Anthony together and found that their letters were almost identical. But why was Anthony's art admission letter exactly the same as theirs? Suddenly, an idea flashed through Eve's mind. She hurriedly grabbed Kelly and took her to the senior who was packing things. She asked anxiously, "Do you have a green admission letter from Southern University?" The senior was stunned for a moment and shook his head quickly. "No, the admission letter from Southern University has always been red." Kelly's heart tightened when he heard this, and he recalled that when he opened Jacob's admission letter, he saw that it was indeed green. Southern University has never issued a green letter of admission. So where did Jacob's admission letter come from? The two of them suddenly realized the truth that they had been shielded by Jacob. They turned pale and their minds went blank. This is impossible. He clearly agreed with us to take the entrance exam to Nanjing University together. He got the highest score in the city. How could he go to another school? The two exchanged serious glances, instantly throwing away all their doubts and worries, and hurriedly ran out of the school. When they returned to Wang's house, they saw a group of strangers in suits talking about something around the ruins. They recognized one of them as someone who had been in contact with Jacob. Kelly walked up quickly and asked, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" News flashed through her mind about criminals who attacked homes after confirming that the owner lived alone. Her heartbeat quickened and her body tensed up. Eve had similar thoughts, but when she saw the group of well-dressed people in front of her, she felt that something was wrong. She asked alertly, "Did you set the fire? Do you know that arson is a felony?" She stared at them closely with a warning tone. The agent seemed extremely confused when he heard what they said. After listening to the two people's doubts, the agent calmly replied, "This house was bought specifically to burn, and someone was hired to watch the fire to ensure that the fire would not spread to other places. How can this be a felony? You are really weird." Kelly couldn't bear to listen anymore and angrily rebuked, "You are talking nonsense." Kelly was always straightforward. Seeing that they refused to admit it, she immediately decided to call the police. She said angrily, "I know the owner of this house. He has lived here for 18 years. How could I not know that his house would burn down? You are really unprepared to lie." The detective was initially angry after hearing what she said, but he softened his attitude when he realized that they seemed to be acquaintances of the previous owner and were of similar age. "I'm a real estate agent at Sun on Real Estate. Some time ago, the previous owner put the house up for sale and cooperated with our company to sell it to the buyer, the gentleman next door. He did buy it specifically to burn for his deceased relatives. Mr. Wang also knew about this and agreed to it. He explained patiently, but the two did not listen at all and even took the initiative to call the police. Eve sneered and said, "Do you think I will believe your nonsense? This is the only property left to Jacob by his parents. How could he agree to burn it?" The agent considered showing them the contract, but he knew that even if he did, they would think it was a fake. Finally, the police were called to the scene, and both sides insisted on their own version of events. Eve said angrily, "Officer Wang, these people are arsonists. Arrest them quickly." Seeing no progress, the police changed their strategy, demanding the real estate agent's purchase contract and slamming it on the table. "Officer, it's obvious that these two girls are being unreasonable. The contract is clearly written in black and white, but they said it was forged and called us liars. We are even considering suing them for defamation." The police took the contract, checked it carefully, and smiled apologetically, with a hint of helplessness in his tone. "This contract is indeed real. There is no problem here. As for the arson incident, of course it does not count." The two were stunned and hurriedly snatched the contract from the police and looked through it. When they saw the signature on the last page of the contract, their hearts sank. Wasn't that Jacob's name? Instantly, the flames of anger rose from the bottom of their hearts. Their emotions became uncontrollable, and they began to laugh out loud. They had never realized that Jacob's acting skills were so superb before. He had changed his major, blocked them, sold the house, and burned it down, all before their eyes, and he had pretended nothing had happened until the first day of school when he told them his choice. Who had he chosen? Was he just going to choose no one and just quietly slip away? But as this thought came to her mind, panic quickly set in. What would they do to Anthony if they couldn't find Jacob? Would they just watch Anthony disappear from their lives forever? No, Anthony must not know about this. Just as Eve's mind was full of questions, the phone rang. She looked down and saw that it was Anthony calling. Her heartbeat suddenly stopped, and she ignored the chaos in front of her and hurried away to answer the phone. "What's up?" Eve asked on the other end of the line. Kelly saw her leave and instinctively followed her. When he got closer, he heard Anthony's voice on the phone. "Eve, how did Jacob report? Did he say which of you he chose?" The two looked at each other. The atmosphere was a little awkward, but they didn't dare to tell the truth. They could only perfunctorily say, "Well, he hasn't said it yet. He mentioned that today is just registration, not the official start of school. We have to wait until the first day of school." Eve nervously tried to find the right words, but her voice was a little weak. Kelly looked at the situation, anxiously snatched the phone, and explained a few words awkwardly. Hearing their explanation, Anthony smiled slightly, with a hint of coldness in his eyes. Jacob is like this again, he said slowly. He can't like both of you at the same time, but he can't make a choice. He cleverly labeled Jacob as a playboy. At this time, Eve and Kelly were only thinking about covering up the fact that Jacob did not go to Southern University. They were anxious to prevent Anthony from discovering their lie, so they believed everything he said and even echoed him. Anthony asked slowly with a hint of disappointment in his tone, "You can't expect us to stay with him forever, right? But you're the one we like, and we want to be with you." Eve nodded nervously, and Kelly looked a little anxious, thinking that if Anthony continued like this, it might make their relationship more and more complicated. Anthony continued, "Let Jacob make the first choice. You have to chase him first, otherwise I will." Before he could finish, Kelly and Eve interrupted him anxiously. "We will go after him, and you are not allowed to talk about leaving." They said this with anxiety and determination, put away their phones, and left the police station. They completely ignored the strangers who were bothering them, leaving Officer Wong to apologize for them helplessly and escort them out personally. After all, he was just a small policeman and could not offend any party. Soon, Eve and Kelly arrived at Southern University. They originally planned to solve Jacob's admission problem, but they did not expect to uncover some unusual secrets. For the convenience of life, Eve and Kelly did not live in the school dormitory, but chose an apartment outside the school. Their fathers had already arranged a place for them, and even bought an apartment nearby for Anthony. Today, they came to ask Anthony if he knew about Jacob's recent situation, but when they knocked on the door, there was no response. The two men were suspicious and worried that something might have happened to Anthony, so they decided to use the key to open the door of the apartment directly. The bedroom door was not completely closed, and Anthony's voice came out without any disguise. "I asked you to take care of Jacob, but you didn't do it at all, and you asked me for money again and again. Will you never stop? You also heard what was said on the phone. Eve and Kelly really love me. They're the top daughters of South City. In front of me, they obey me like dogs, coming when I call them and leaving when I wave them away. I told them to chase anyone they want, and they don't care at all. Even if you reveal this, will they believe it? They listen to me more than Jacob, who grew up with them. If I knocked Jacob unconscious and threw him into the sea, they would come to rescue me first." Eve and Kelly were filled with panic when they heard these words. They had never thought that Anthony, who was usually gentle and polite, had such a side behind his back. They couldn't believe that all those things that almost killed Jacob were actually done by Anthony. In their eyes, Jacob was once a repentant good man, but the truth was that the once deeply hurt Jacob was actually a pawn carefully designed by Anthony. Looking back, they were unconsciously led by him to hurt Jacob, their friend of 15 years, and they realized that they had actually walked step by step into the abyss. And behind this collapse was all the scripts planned by the man they once loved deeply. At this time, Kelly could no longer suppress the anger in her heart. With a bang, she kicked open the bedroom door, making a loud noise. Eve saw Anthony's reaction. Her inner anger was not suppressed at all. Her expression became even gloomier, and her black eyes stared at him, making him shudder. Anthony's heart was beating so hard that it seemed like it was going to burst out of his chest. His mind was blank, and he had no idea that what he had just said had been heard. He lowered his head. His face turned pale in an instant. His body seemed to have lost all strength, and he collapsed to the ground. He wanted to explain, but he didn't know where to start. He could only pray that they didn't hear him clearly. Eve looked at him coldly, her tone calm, but with a cold sense of oppression. "Aren't you going to explain?" Her eyes were emotionless, looking at him as if he was no longer a living person, but just an empty shell. Anthony felt a strong panic spread rapidly throughout his body. He began to crawl towards them in panic, using his hands and feet to try to get closer, his voice trembling. "No, it's not like that. Eve, Kelly, you have to let me explain. I don't mean that." Kelly interrupted him impatiently, furious. "Okay, we're listening. Tell me how it feels to be chased by a dog. Explain how you pushed Jacob into the sea and how you paid someone to destroy Jacob." With every word he spoke, Anthony's face became paler, until finally he was completely speechless and could no longer utter a word. His body couldn't stop shaking, and his heart was in a state of panic. He was completely panicked and didn't know how to face everything in front of him. His mind was blank, and the only thought in his mind was to find an excuse to get himself out of the situation. His eyes were in a panic. He looked around and finally fixed his eyes on the phone that had fallen to the ground. The phone had just fallen to the ground because of shock. A glimmer of hope flashed in his eyes, as if he had grabbed a life-saving straw. He suddenly reached out to grab it, and pointed at the phone eagerly. Eve, Kelly, that was not my intention. It's this guy who has been causing trouble for me. He hurriedly explained, but before he could finish with a slap sound, he was slapped by both of them at the same time. He fell directly to the ground. His body slid half a meter, and his back hit the corner of the bed hard, and severe pain came instantly. Although the severe pain in his back almost made him lose consciousness, Anthony still didn't dare to show any expression and could only try his best to look pitiful. He had used this gesture countless times to gain sympathy and pity, but this time, Eve and Kelly just stared at him coldly, without any room for mercy. Seeing that they were determined not to give him any more chances, Anthony gritted his teeth and finally stopped hiding it, angrily admitting, "Yes, I am malicious. I envy Jacob. He's just an orphan, but I don't accept that he's being admired by everyone because of his status as a rich young man." He sneered, without any regret on his face. "I want to see him being toyed with just because of his sentence. Do you really think it's noble, Eve, Kelly? I didn't force you to do anything, except to pursue Jacob. He was almost bankrupt, but he couldn't call the police. Didn't you help him do that?" His voice was low but full of provocation. "I didn't ask you to rescue him when he fell into the water, nor did I stop you from calling the police, and I didn't force you to give me the design and the amulet. Why you blame me?" Anthony completely restored his true face, no longer hiding it, his eyes full of sneers. "Anyway, the matter has been torn apart. What else do you want to do?" Eve stopped and stabbed Anthony with her eyes like a knife, making him breathless for a moment. Anthony finally realized what he had said, but then he changed his mind and thought that they had no intention of letting him go anyway. Cold sweat poured down his forehead, and the panic in his heart could not be calmed down. Kelly said coldly, "Anthony, we were just deceived by you. You have malicious intentions and want to drag us into this." Her words were cold, and her eyes swept across the room, as if she was examining the entire situation. "Do you think a few words can influence us?" Kelly smiled contemptuously, his tone full of disdain. "Even if what you said is true, so what? We will still be respected, and you are just a rat in the gutter." She added mercilessly, "This house feels dirty after a rat like you live there." She never showed mercy to people she didn't like. She once liked Anthony and was willing to cherish him. But as the truth gradually revealed, the love she once had completely disappeared. Anthony stared at them with resentment in his eyes. He was filled with resentment. He sneered and fought back. "I'm a rat in the gutter, so what are you? Your achievements depend on me, and your wealth depends on the Liu and Su families." He gnashed his teeth and said in an angry tone, "At least everything I have is earned through my own efforts. But what about you? Without me and the Liu and Su families, what are you? Without the Liu and Su families, would I care about your feelings?" Anthony gritted his teeth secretly, slowly stood up, and his breath became more and more rapid. "You guys are so hypocritical." This completely infuriated Eve and Kelly. Their faces were so gloomy that water seemed to drip out. Then, unexpectedly, they suddenly laughed. Eve whispered, "If you do something wrong, you have to pay the price." She looked at Anthony coldly and turned away. Kelly did not stop and followed Eve out. As for what would happen to Anthony next, it was no longer their business. They knew that someone would take care of it. Their first priority was to find Jacob, but when they asked around, they found that few people knew the truth. Jacob's parents divorced, and he was abandoned since childhood. He lost contact with his family and had few friends. When he was a child, his only friends were Eve and Kelly, but now they have lost contact with him. Jacob's house was sold. It caught fire, and in the end, only a pile of ashes remained with no clues. At this moment, an idea suddenly flashed through Eve's mind, and she quickly took out her cell phone to make a call. The call was quickly connected, and Eve was so anxious that she even forgot to say hello and asked directly, "Teacher, and did Jacob ask to change his major later?" Annie paused slightly on the other end of the phone and replied, "Yes, he transferred to North City University. I told him that his grades were good enough. I don't know why he insisted on applying to Nanjing University. Although Nanjing University is also very good, it would definitely be better to go to the top university," Annie said in a tone of voice, and she didn't seem to notice that Eve was no longer paying attention to what she said. After learning this information, Eve stopped talking to the teacher and quickly hung up the phone. Kelly, who was quietly waiting, was stunned when he heard the words North City University. The distance between the university town A in the north and the south, where they were imprisoned, was 1,884 kilometers. Jacob had actually run to such a faraway place alone. This hatred towards them made him who was once timid and afraid of loneliness, resolutely decided to come to City A to avoid everything. Eve looked at Kelly, who was silent, and asked affectionately, "Will you go find him?" "Definitely." Kelly looked up and looked at Eve firmly. She wanted to find Jacob and tell him that she never really wanted to break up with him. Her past actions were not her original intention, but she was deceived. Eve felt the determination in Kelly's eyes, and she knew that she had the same idea as herself. The two looked at each other tacitly, and they both knew what to do next. Jacob arrived at North City University to register. After completing the registration, he got the dormitory key. There were 4 beds in the dormitory, and he was the last one to arrive. After a brief greeting, the other 3 began to pack their luggage. Jacob was the first to finish packing. Apart from the bedding provided by the school, he brought almost nothing else, only a few clothes. Next to his bed lived a boy from the South City named David. He wore a pair of black frame glasses and did not look serious, but rather lively and cheerful. Seeing that Jacob's luggage was so simple, David came over curiously and asked, "Why do you have so little stuff?" Jacob nodded gently and explained in a gentle voice, "Most things can be bought here. It's nothing particularly important anyway, so I plan to buy it when I get there." After hearing this, David showed an envious expression and said with a smile, "When I came, my mother stuffed a lot of things in my pocket, saying that I could use them all here. But it turns out that I was exhausted just carrying the suitcase." Although he was complaining, his words were full of happiness. Jacob felt bitter in his heart. He thought of his parents, whose marriage was arranged by the family. Because of their incompatibility, his parents always quarreled and never had any real feelings for him. They gave birth to him just to complete a task, and he never really felt the love of his parents. Later, his parents divorced, and he became a burden that neither side wanted. Listening to David's little troubles about his family, Jacob smiled and said to him, "That's also their love for you." After packing his luggage and getting familiar with the campus, the sky gradually darkened. After a busy day, Jacob felt physically and mentally exhausted and soon fell into a deep sleep. The next morning, he got up early, washed up, and prepared to start his new life at North City University. When he first came downstairs, he heard a commotion. When he got closer, he heard a lot of discussion among the crowd. "Who are those 2? I didn't see them during the freshman orientation." Just because you're in charge of freshman orientation doesn't mean you've met all of them. But they're so beautiful. I've never heard of them before. They must be new this year. Who are they waiting for? I really want to know who is so lucky to be waited for by 2 beautiful ladies. These whispers inadvertently reached Jacob's ears. He raised his eyebrows, feeling a little curious about what kind of beauty could attract so many people to watch. Jacob followed the flow of people and unexpectedly saw 2 familiar faces, Eve and Kelly. They were standing beside the campus avenue, searching the crowd with their eyes, and almost immediately locked onto Jacob, who had just come downstairs. They all shouted in unison, "Jacob!" This shout attracted the attention of everyone around. The 2 strode towards Jacob, and seeing this scene, Jacob instinctively turned around, changed direction, and walked to the other side. He quickened his pace, gradually changing from walking to jogging, until he suddenly felt someone pulling his wrist and his body was forced to stop. Jacob looked down and saw that Eve and Kelly had caught up with him and were holding his hands tightly. Jacob pulled his hand back abruptly, with a hint of vigilance in his eyes, and asked in a low voice, "What are you 2 doing here? South City and City A are nearly 2,000 kilometers apart. Why did you suddenly come here?" Kelly frowned, her voice trembling. "Jacob, why did you block us? Didn't you say you would give us the answer on the first day of school and tell us who you chose?" She bit her lip, looking a little aggrieved. Even if they did favor Anthony before, they were good friends who grew up together after all. How could 15 years of friendship become so stiff because of a misunderstanding? She thought that if they could explain it clearly, Jacob might understand their feelings, and as long as he took this step down, everything might be reconciled. But she didn't expect that Jacob responded coldly. "Haven't you 2 had enough fun?" He smiled sarcastically, which made Kelly and Eve feel completely at a loss. They thought Jacob might just be angry, so they quickly explained, "Jacob, did you misunderstand something?" He tried to reach out and pull Jacob's hand, but he quickly dodged. Jacob put away his smile, stared at them coldly, and said more firmly, "I think my meaning is very clear. Eve, Kelly, if you like Anthony, go after him yourself. I'm not forcing you to stay with me." He paused, his tone even harsher. "Just because I didn't accept your pursuit, Anthony is going to threaten me to disappear?" You all like him and are willing to do anything for him. I'm out, and you three can do whatever you want with your love and affection. But please stay away from me, for the sake of our acquaintance for at least 15 years. Hearing this, Eve and Kelly froze in their places, their hearts aching. Eve immediately said, "No, that's not the case, Jacob. We all like you. When do we ever like Anthony? Did you misunderstand something?" She forced a smile, but her voice was a little hesitant, and her eyes were unconsciously wandering. Thinking that they had severed their relationship with Anthony, they felt a little more confident. Kelly immediately echoed, "Yes, Jacob, the person we have always liked is you really. We're still waiting for your answer. How could we like someone else?" Her voice was full of sincerity, and her eyes became deep, as if after this verbal struggle, her inner emotions became clearer. They knew in their hearts that, apart from Anthony, everyone still liked Jacob. Thinking of this, they felt a little calmer. I calmly turned on the recording on my phone, and their voices came out clearly in the recording. They said, "Don't let us chase Jacob, okay? Every moment with him is torture. We can't pretend anymore. We really like you. Why can't we stay with you, and you still persuade us? I don't care. You can leave if you want. I'm going to find Jacob. You should have received the notice, and will definitely want to share the joy with us. I'm going to go find him too. His life or death has nothing to do with me. I only care about you. Jacob, stop making a fuss. This is no small matter. We are all classmates. School is about to start. There's no need to ruin someone's future." The recordings of these words were made public. I remained expressionless, but my tone was full of sarcasm. In addition, one of you stole my design and gave it to him, and the other gave him the amulet I asked for. On the one hand, she made excuses that she couldn't come to deliver my luggage, while on the other hand, she went to help others move. If you love someone so much that you have to step on your significant other and become a stepping stone for others, I really have nothing to say, and I can't stand it. As soon as the first audio was released, Eve and Kelly's faces turned pale. Could it be that Jacob already knew all the truth? I turned around and was about to leave. Eve and Kelly felt an inexplicable emptiness in their hearts, as if something had completely gone away. Kelly was still unwilling to accept it and tried to argue. "But you didn't lose anything substantial. Can we just look at our relationship over the past 15 years and pretend that nothing happened before?" Eve also said, "Jacob, I know I have treated you badly in the past. Can we forget the past and start over?" Eve's eyes was clearly visible. She couldn't accept that the friendship of 15 years had been broken by a sinister Anthony. Seeing them show no remorse, as if not agreeing would make them the most heartless people, I just found it ridiculous. How could they take it for granted? I sneered in response. "What do you mean I didn't suffer any loss? Being knocked unconscious and thrown into the sea is no loss. Almost losing everything and having nowhere to turn to is no loss. My hard-earned design draft was stolen is no loss." I looked at them coldly, my eyes full of disgust. "There's no need, Eve, Kelly. I never realized that you are rotten to the core." I shook my head and stared at their familiar faces, but at this moment, I felt extremely strange. By the way, ever since they said that even if Anthony wanted to ruin me, I shouldn't ruin his future in my eyes, they're no different from pigs and dogs. Kelly was still unwilling to give up. As soon as she reached out her hand, I slapped her away. "Don't touch me. I'm dirty." I looked at them with disgust in my eyes. Now, to mention the 15-year friendship. When you listened to Anthony's words and laughed at me, knocked me unconscious and threw me into the sea, did you think about the 15-year friendship? I was about to go bankrupt and asked you for help, but you want to save Anthony. Did you ever think about this friendship? Did you ever think about this friendship when you conspired with the South City Police Department to prevent me from suing Anthony? Did you ever think about this friendship when you took my design and amulet to please Anthony? Now you're talking about 15 years of friendship, but it's just that you have no one to rely on. I saw through their disguise completely. Eve's face turned pale at first, then red, and she wanted to refute, but didn't know where to start. I said coldly, "I don't have time to play with you. Get out of the way." I didn't want to look at them again and strode forward. Kelly looked at my back, holding back tears, his eyes red, and murmured, "Jacob, we were just deceived. We will prove it to you. When the truth is revealed to the public, can you forgive us?" Eve didn't know. She just felt that restoring everything to the way it was might be the only chance to get Jacob's forgiveness. The two bought plane tickets and returned to South City that day. Jacob cares a lot about Anthony's existence. They want to prove that even if they once had feelings for Anthony, that is in the past, and from now on there will only be Jacob in their lives. On the day when Southern University officially opened, a big news suddenly broke out. A freshman at Southern University, jealous of his classmates' excellence, committed a series of bad deeds. In order to retaliate, he deliberately hired someone to hurt his classmate, and even his classmate's award-winning work was not spared, and he had previously stolen his classmate's original manuscript. Even more shocking is that at a class reunion, he threw a classmate into the sea, suspected of attempted murder. As this person has never revealed his name, everyone is speculating about the authenticity of the incident and who this person is. At the welcome party, Anthony was performing on the stage, attracting everyone's attention. However, at this moment, the police suddenly appeared and took him away. This incident confirmed the previous rumors. Someone recalled that when the case was reported that day, two new campus beauties of Nanjing University seemed to have had a relationship with the freshman. When others asked privately, one shook his head and the other sighed. Eve said, "We have been classmates since high school. At that time, he looked harmless, and we took him into our circle out of pity for him. Who would have thought that we would hurt our friend who grew up together because of jealousy?" Kelly also echoed, "Yes, the injured person is our friend. I didn't expect that we let the wolf into the house. It was really us who harmed him." They pretended to be completely in the dark and didn't know the truth until today. Their faces were full of heartache, which made the students who came to ask about it sigh. Someone comforted them. "You can't judge a person by his appearance. It's not all your fault. After all, when we first met, who would have thought he would be so vicious and shameless?" Eve and Kelly kicked Anthony out of the apartment, packed up his things, and threw them out. That night, after Eve and Kelly left, Anthony thought they would be busy chasing Jacob, but they came back the next day. After all, they said before that mistakes must be paid. Later, Anthony was afraid that they would come back for revenge, but he didn't expect that what he got was a short-lived peace. Anthony thought that they were just distancing themselves from him and would not really do anything. He finally relaxed and began to reduce his sense of existence, thinking that he just needed to spend a few years in college in peace. He planned to sell the gifts they had given him for money and escape from here after getting his degree, thinking that he would definitely have a good life. As for the welcome party, he just signed up for it before, and during the initial period, he couldn't back out. Now that he no longer has the support of Eve and Kelly, he naturally has no capital to act willfully and can only pray that nothing goes wrong at the party. However, at this moment, Anthony suddenly found that people around him were whispering. He looked over, but found nothing. At first, he thought he was overthinking it, but on the night of the welcome party, when he was performing on the stage, a group of police suddenly appeared and took him away. Only then did he realize that the person everyone had been talking about was him. He shouted loudly, "I want to see Eve and Kelly. I want to see them." He made a scene and refused to cooperate, but Eve and Kelly were no longer intimidated by him and directly handed over all the evidence to the police. By the time I got the news, everything had already come to an end. Anthony was sentenced to 3 years in prison for intentional injury, but despite overwhelming evidence, he refused to plead guilty and showed no remorse, and was eventually expelled from Southern University. On the day when everything was settled, the first snow fell in City A. Eve and Kelly stood outside the dormitory building, holding umbrellas and looking out from afar. After a few months, the two looked much calmer, as if they had finally let go of their worries, with a hint of relief on their faces. Seeing me approaching, they smiled confidently and called softly, "Jacob." I walked slowly, and Eve and Kelly couldn't wait, so they walked towards me with smiles on their faces, and they kept their voices low. They were relieved to see me, smiling and waving. Just as the two of them relaxed, I walked straight past them and walked toward the boy behind them. After a brief surprise, Eve and Kelly turned around at the same time and realized that I was not greeting them, but talking to another person. I smiled and said to David, "It's snowing heavily today. Why did you suddenly think of bringing me food? You didn't do that when the weather was good before." David smiled and replied, "It's snowing, isn't it? It's the first snow this year, which is quite meaningful. I want to trouble you for a favor. I'm not good at taking pictures. Can you take a few for me?" I smiled and responded, "Okay, for the sake of this meal, I will reluctantly agree." David smiled happily and said, "Good brother, you are so reliable." Just as I was about to leave with David, Kelly suddenly called out, "Jacob!" I didn't stop and continued to walk forward with David. David turned back curiously and looked behind him. "Jacob, why do I hear someone calling you?" I remained expressionless, continued walking forward, and responded, "Really? Maybe you heard it wrong." But before I had gone far, someone grabbed my wrist again. I paused, sighed helplessly, and thought, why are these two people always entangled? Kelly's tone was filled with a hint of grievance, and he held my hand tightly, and I couldn't shake it off no matter how hard I tried. Eve fell behind, put one hand on David's shoulder, and failed to grab my other hand, so she stood in front of me to prevent me from breaking free again. David looked at this scene, feeling that he shouldn't be here at this moment. He looked at me, then at them, and finally sighed softly. I knew I couldn't avoid it, so I stopped trying to evade him, let go of David's shoulders, and said, "David, go over there and wait for me for a while. I have something I want to talk to them about alone." David naturally wouldn't refuse. He pointed to the playground not far away and waved to me, saying, "I'll go over first. Come find me on the playground after you finish talking." I nodded and watched David run toward the playground. Then I turned back to look at Eve and Kelly, reaching out to pry open Kelly's fingers one by one. The smile I had just had on David was completely gone, and I looked at them coldly, my eyes full of impatience, and asked, "Tell me, what are you doing here this time?" The huge contrast in attitude made the two feel uncomfortable. Kelly lowered his eyes and said humbly, "Jacob, we have thought carefully about what you said last time. We did not handle it right at that time, and we owe you an apology, so—" She held the box in both hands and handed it to me. Eve also handed over a judgment in due course. Kelly continued, "We have explained to the organizer that Anthony stole your previous design draft to participate in the competition, and this award should belong to you. Also, we have sent Anthony to jail for trying to hurt you. Jacob, we have put everything back in place. Can we start over?" I took the trophy, the certificate of honor, the re-signed design draft, and the verdict. Indeed, many things seemed to have returned to their original positions. My design draft and Anthony also had the ending they deserved. On the surface, everything really returned to the starting point, but for me, everything was too late. Moreover, not everything really returned to its original position. I carefully put away the design and returned the rest of the items intact. Eve and Kelly were very surprised and asked, "Jacob, what do you mean?" I said, "It's winter now and it's quite cold. If Miss Liu and Miss Sue have nothing else to do, please go back." After saying that, I turned around and prepared to leave. Seeing that I was about to leave, Kelly suddenly became angry and raised his voice unconsciously. "Jacob, didn't we get justice for you? Jacob, what exactly are you dissatisfied with? Even if you want to make a scene, you should know when to stop." Eve was still standing in front of me, her frowning brows revealing her inner thoughts. She felt that I didn't know how to back off from the situation and that I had gone too far. Kelly's raised voice attracted the attention of passers-by, and people began to whisper, and some even directly accused and gossiped. Eve and Kelly had never been subject to such discussions. The two of them kept their lips tightly closed, the atmosphere was solemn, and they finally stopped talking. "I'm not afraid of those looks. From any angle, I don't think I am wrong." I sneered, not disguising my contempt for them, and said, "I'm not dissatisfied. I'm just talking about the facts." "Kelly, Eve, I have never asked you to do anything except help me. Don't you two have any responsibility for the current situation? If you two hadn't stolen my design draft in order to please my crush, would I have waited until now for your so-called handling?" My straightforward words made them blush and speechless. I said, "South City is far away from City 8 girls. I hope we won't meet again in the future." I was about to look away and walk away, but after taking a few steps, I heard Kelly's voice behind me. She said, "I'm sorry. Jacob, I didn't think before I spoke, but we really know we were wrong. Are you really so heartless? You won't even give us a chance to make amends." Her voice trembled slightly. After a long silence, Eve finally spoke again. "And you promised to tell us your final choice." I turned around and looked at Eve and Kelly, who were still standing there stubbornly and refused to leave. In the fluttering snowflakes, their figures looked lonely and desolate. I suddenly remembered the year we first met. It was also a snowy day like this. I was only 3 years old at that time. The housekeeper took me there while my parents were busy with their own things. After taking me there, the housekeeper also went to deal with the servants' affairs. I looked through the fence and saw Eve and Kelly playing together in another yard. Their parents were watching from behind, fearing that something might happen. The two little girls looked at me with eager eyes and waved to me. "Brother, do you want to play with us?" We grew up together in kindergarten and went to the same school for elementary, middle, and high school. But from the moment Anthony appeared in our freshman year, the trajectory of my destiny began to change. In fact, when I think about it carefully, I still can't figure out when it started. They began to like Anthony, and they loved him so madly that they seemed to have completely lost their normal reason and ignored our 15-year friendship. It had been a long time since it snowed in the South City. Now we were facing each other in the snow again, with no estrangement on the surface. But we can never go back to the past without misunderstandings. I smiled at them and said, "You want the answer? Well, I'll tell you. My answer from the beginning was, Kelly, Eve, I won't choose any of you." As soon as I finished speaking, I turned and walked toward the playground. This time, they didn't say anything, and I didn't look back. Kelly looked melancholy and asked Willow in a heavy voice, "Is it really our fault?" I was wearing a white down jacket and walking away from the crowd in the snow. Kelly was depressed and wanted to cry, but couldn't. I just felt a sore throat. Willow didn't respond, but just stared blankly in the direction where Jacob left. She had never felt so strongly before, as if she had really lost Jacob forever. 15 years and 3 years. They lost the real 15 years, but gained 3 false years. David asked curiously, "Who were those 2 people just now?" "I told you someone called you, and you said I must have heard it wrong." A cold wind blew past. He wrapped himself tightly, leaving only his eyes exposed, and his nose was red from the cold. Although they were all from South City, David had definitely heard of the Lu Su family, but he was just a student after all, so it was normal that he didn't know them. I just shook my head and said nonchalantly, "We are just old friends, and we won't be friends anymore soon." "What happened?" David didn't like to pry into other people's privacy, but he blurted out this question. After asking, he realized it was impolite, so he laughed dryly and said, "If it's inconvenient to talk about it, forget it. Just pretend I didn't ask." David and I took some beautiful photos of the snow scene, and then we returned to the dormitory with satisfaction. As soon as we entered the dormitory, David saw me turn on the computer and tinker with something. He accidentally caught a glimpse of the contents on the computer screen and immediately came over and said anxiously, "I swear I didn't peek on purpose. I just saw it by accident." David raised his hand and swore seriously. Then he pointed at the news on the screen and said, "Are you also paying attention to the Nanyang Technological University incident? That guy named Anthony is too much. He did so many vicious things just because he was jealous of other people's background. Those 2 girls are quite pitiful. They wanted to help him, but ended up doing something bad." As I listened, I gradually realized that something was wrong. Thinking back to that interview, I couldn't help laughing out loud. This is their so-called way of dealing with things, putting all the blame on Anthony and getting away with it, even portraying themselves as victims. But Anthony was not the only one who hurt me. Eve and Kelly hurt me more than Anthony did. Just like people can accept the malice of strangers, but it is the most difficult to bear the betrayal of friends. To me, Anthony is no different from a stranger. But Eve and Kelly have been with me for 15 years, accompanying me through countless hardships, and should have been the most important people in my life, but in the end they hurt me for others. They put all the blame on Anthony, but they loved Anthony so much. How could they give him up so easily? I couldn't understand it, and I didn't want to bother myself with it anymore. Someone will always give me answers to these questions. During the winter vacation, I returned to South City. In fact, I didn't expect that I would come back in less than half a year after settling in City A. After getting off the plane, I didn't stay for long and went straight to the prison to see Anthony. I wanted to find out what happened back then. I didn't believe that Eve and Kelly would hate the person they once loved, just because of my departure. However, when I saw Anthony, every word he said hurt me like a needle, but none of them were the answers I wanted. I rubbed my forehead, suppressed my inner irritation, and said, "What happened back then was not just you. I don't believe you loved them so much that you were willing to protect them with all your strength. If you really love Eve and Kelly, why do you keep urging them to be with me?" His cursing stopped abruptly. After a long time, he hesitated and asked, "What do you want to help me with?" But then he thought again and felt that it was impossible and said, "They are all thinking about you now. Will you really let them go?" I didn't quite understand Anthony's thoughts. I was silent for a moment, then sighed and said, "You just need to tell me everything." Through the glass of the meeting room, Anthony seemed to be lost in thought. He looked at me deeply, suddenly smiled, and said, "You are really the same kind of people as them, just as cruel. As long as it touches your own interests, no matter who it is, you will hit them hard." I shook my head after hearing this. He expected that I would deny it, but my reason shocked him. I said, "I am different from them. I act for my own interests, but always within the legal and reasonable boundaries. Eve and Kelly directly. After all, as the only heirs of the Liu and Su families, their words and deeds represent the family. They were able to prevent anyone from taking my case in South City, and they can still do it now. So I used a method they had used before. On the first day of school at all major universities, a piece of news spread quickly. People were talking about it. Have you heard about it? The freshman who was arrested actually had someone backing him up last year. Otherwise, how could an ordinary freshman get away with it? Why didn't the victim call the police? Because someone was protecting him. Who is this backer? Do we still need to guess? Everyone knows how good the two girls from the Liu and Su families were to him. They said they didn't know, but who else could know except the real victims? Besides, it is said that the victims were their childhood friends, which makes more sense. For the sake of lovers, abandoning friends. Naturally, you will choose lovers. As the topic became more and more popular, the people in power in the Liu and Su families realized that things were not going well and immediately took steps to stop the losses. It was still the old way to control the heat. But this time, the originally effective means backfired and even triggered public protests. The official accounts of the two companies were full of protests and dissatisfaction, with netizens criticizing, "Can't you come up with something new? Aren't you tired of using the same old trick? Yeah, they're so powerful. Why can't you produce any evidence? They want to suppress the heat again. What's wrong? Are you feeling guilty?" The two companies are busy and exhausted, but the situation is becoming more and more tense. With no signs of cooling down, the PR team realized that someone was behind the incident and began to discredit the original victim, saying that the victim was timid and did not dare to speak out in the face of such things because he was afraid of being criticized after reporting them. Some netizens believed it and thought it was not uncommon for someone to choose to silently endure such things. Now that the truth has been exposed, the victim did not reflect on his own cowardice, but instead boldly slandered the people who helped him. Eve and Kelly are really ungrateful. Of course, there are believers and non-believers. Both sides think they have the truth, so a war of words broke out. The focus of the argument instantly shifted to me. Some people even dug up my account, and some insulted me, some supported me, and some asked what the truth was. Just when Liu and Su thought they could get away with it, a real name report appeared online, pushing Liu and Su to the top of the hot search list, and the reporter was me. At that time, I wanted to find evidence, and fortunately, I had the habit of recording. I held tightly in my hands the video of my police report and the audio I secretly recorded when Eve and Kelly forced me to drop the case. Once these were made public, they instantly caused an uproar. The public content is clear and logical and fully presents the truth of the matter. Let's start with our initial friendship. It talked about how Eve and Kelly pursued me madly for Anthony, and then Anthony continued to hurt me. They were unaware at the beginning, but later they took the initiative to protect him and even stole the works I designed for him. Their behavior had already exceeded the legal boundaries. If they hadn't realized later that the people they loved didn't love them at all and were just using them, I'm afraid that what happened later wouldn't have happened. They felt embarrassed and angry, and eventually sent the people they once tried so hard to protect to prison. But no matter how the Liu and Su families argued, it was all in vain. The seriousness of the matter attracted the attention of the relevant authorities, and after a comprehensive and in-depth investigation, the situation began to develop in a direction that no one could control. The Liu and Su families eventually fell from power, and all the evil deeds they had committed before were exposed. Officials involved in collusion between officials and businessmen and accepting bribes were also severely punished. When I met Eve and Kelly again, they had long lost their former glory. Looking at their haggard faces, one can imagine how much they have suffered during this period. They looked at me with complicated expressions, and their tone was full of loss. They asked, "Do you really hate us so much? Hate us so much that you ignore our 15-year friendship and force us into a desperate situation?" There was something hesitant in their eyes, and I understood it, but I only felt a little ironic. I couldn't help but say, "Shouldn't I be angry? Don't mention 15 years of friendship anymore. If we really want to trace it back, weren't you the first ones to give up our friendship? When you used me as a tool to please Anthony, please don't mention friendship anymore. Where was the friendship when you asked me to give up reporting Anthony and told the entire South City Police Department to stop taking my cases? You stole my design and gave it to Anthony, and even gave him the amulet I asked for. Now, that trouble has come. You still want to talk about 15 years of friendship?" They lowered their heads and choked up. "I'm sorry, Jacob." Eve and Kelly's faces were filled with regret, but it was too late. They finally realized that this relationship could never be repaired. The so-called reconciliation was just their self-consolation. Half a month later, the Liu and Su families went bankrupt one after another. The once prominent families lost all their glory overnight. The two daughters who were once high and mighty became the laughingstock of the people in the blink of an eye. Although the two fathers tried their best to protect them and arrange for them to stay in Southern University, the cold reception and debts that followed them like a shadow had long made them unable to bear it. The former fame was now only left with cold eyes and suffocating debts. The collapse of the two major groups completely eliminated the support of the Liu and Su families. I finally had the opportunity to sue Kelly for stealing the design. Fortunately, the design was eventually returned to them, and the case ended with mental compensation. Although the amount of compensation was not large, only more than $50,000, it was undoubtedly a double blow to Eve and Kelly, who once had no worries about wealth. I did not rush them to repay, but extended the repayment period for them. After all, compared with millions or hundreds of millions of debts, my $50,000 is not a big sum. I don't mean to force them into a desperate situation. I just want to fight for the belated justice for myself in this way. When everything was settled, I invited David and two roommates to celebrate, celebrating that I had gotten rid of this heavy relationship and started a new life. From then on, Eve and Kelly and I no longer had any relationship. Even if there was, it was only a relationship between creditors and debtors. Cheers! This long struggle took too much time, and 3 years passed in a flash. It was supposed to be a relaxing and enjoyable gathering, but I knew that this might be our last meal together. David drank a lot of wine and couldn't help singing at the end. He patted my shoulder and said, "Jacob, you are amazing. You have been through so much and you can still stay strong. If it were me, I would have collapsed long ago." I smiled and whispered, "But feelings are not a necessity in life. No matter what you go through, your life still belongs to you. We must always be honest with ourselves." "Jacob, how do you plan for the future?" another roommate asked curiously. After all, facing the pressure of 2 bankruptcies alone, not many people can persevere to the end. Everyone thought that I would be successful no matter what I did in the future. I responded, "First, I plan to continue my education and go to graduate school. As for my longer-term plans, I certainly hope to become an excellent designer. I believe that as long as I work hard, my life will get better and better in the future."